Kia ora koutou, Markie here. So some of you that are familiar with this channel will know that I'm a psychotherapist by profession, and I have a penchant for making videos about song lyrics and other things that speak to psychological conditions, or have a connection with therapy, or just something about the human condition. And sometimes I make videos just doing reviews about films and things that I've enjoyed, music that I enjoy, or sometimes things that maybe I didn't enjoy. I'm not great at film reviews really, because I can never remember any of the actors. I usually can't remember the plot. I have sensory issues, so when I'm actually watching things, I quite often just don't see things. Things can be on the screen and I'll just miss them. So I'm not the best kind of reviewer, although I think I have something interesting to say usually. But I watched a film the other day, so I'm showing you, this is in the background on the screen. I was just giving you some blurry images, just something for your eye to casually glance over as you listen. There will be spoilers in this anyway, so spoiler warning coming up. I watched a film courtesy of FlickVault called The House of Mortal Sin from 1976. And as I nearly always do after I watch a film, I Google it and look at the usually Wikipedia, and just find out a little bit about it. Usually look at the plot, because quite often I misunderstand the plot. I did with this one, and it had some quite bad reviews actually, although I think it's an excellent film. So I like horror. I say I like horror. I probably more accurate to say I like gothic movies. I'm not into jump scares. I don't want to be scared by watching a film. Not that I don't. That's not that I don't want to be, but that's not one of my criteria for watching a film. Is, you know, about how scared it makes me. I'm more interested in the mood and the atmosphere. So I suppose really that's more about gothic movies than horror movies. I'm almost always disappointed by horror films. I always say that there's, you could list the good horror films that have been made on the fingers of one finger. But there have been a few. That's not true. There are some good ones. In my experience, they're the old ones, like this one, The House of Mortal Sin. I like the old Amicus ones and the old Hammer ones and all that kind of thing. Now, there's probably some, contemporary horror films that are brilliant, and I'm just missing them. But I find it kind of difficult, because you can ask people for a recommendation for horror films, but people look for different things in a film. So they'll recommend a film that floats their boat, won't necessarily float my boat. But this one I enjoyed. Okay, and I like kind of stuff from the 70s as well, because that's when I was a child and I grew up and stuff. So it's a bit of a nostalgia fest for me as well. And I think this is an intelligent film, of which there are very few intelligent horror films. That's my other kind of grumble. It was described as a slasher, but I wouldn't say it was a slasher. It does involve several murders and assaults, but I don't think it's plot driven. It's a great story. Now you can see from the image on the screen now, you're seeing a Roman Catholic priest. Priests in movies are always Roman Catholic, aren't they? And that's because I think the Roman Catholic Church is the most, what's the word I'm looking for? It's the most, it's more, there are things in the Catholic Church that are very visual. There's lots of the churches are ornate. The priests often wear quite elaborate vestments. There's candles, there's ritual, there's ceremony. It's a much more sexy church than some of the very kind of stripped down Protestant churches for movies. Now, this is not a reflection on religion. Okay, I'm not saying that if you're a Protestant, that's anything worse than being Catholic. For me, I'm respectful of all paths that people follow, but there's something much more cinematic, that's the word I'm looking for, cinematic about the Catholic Church, or it refers to the Catholic Church. And it is about, essentially, and this, stop listening if you want to watch this, or pause, even better, pause, go onto the Flick Vault, have a watch of it, a great film, and then come back, and then we can discuss it together. So it's about a priest that takes his duties of trying to encourage moral behavior and godly behavior among his flock a little bit too far, and ends up killing some of them. And it's a great plot, and he gets away with it in the end because he's devious, which I like. I like a bit of I like a devious villain. I even quite like it when devious villains get away with things. I don't know what that says about me, but he's a nasty piece of work, this guy. He's pretty horrible to everyone, apart from, well, even his mum, in a way. He kind of idolizes and dotes on his mum, but ends up killing her, and actually allows a situation where she's horribly abused, and he's oblivious to her distress in a lot of cases because he is so wrapped up in his own stuff, and it's a very narcissistic character. So it's interesting that, you know, these you tend to think that the profession of the priesthood, or being a pastor or a minister or a padre or a pastor, would attract kind of nice people, but actually it's one of those professions that attracts one of the highest incidents of psychopaths, and I think probably narcissists as well. This guy is narcissistic in many ways, but that's probably not what defines him. What I think probably does define him is something called sexual anorexia. Now, I've done some videos on sexual anorexia before, but not in the context of this film. I think this film illustrates sexual anorexia really well, taken to an extreme. What do we mean by sexual anorexia? Well, what do we mean by anorexia nervosa, which is, you know, where you probably heard the term anorexia. So somebody with anorexia, it's an eating disorder where somebody will stop eating. They'll try and control their food intake. They'll be obsessive about weight and body image, and on a physical level they become dangerously thin, sometimes fatally. And then there is something called bulimia. Well, let's go to the two extremes first. So the opposite extreme of anorexia is compulsive overeating, which people don't talk about so much as a condition, but it is a condition. And there's a fantastic organization called Overeaters Anonymous, which nobody has ever heard of or knows about. And people who overeat compulsively and have problems with weight, it's the last thing they ever try. Usually they get sucked into some kind of crazy weight loss scheme where they end up spending money or giving their money to somebody else. Overeaters Anonymous, it doesn't cost you anything. It's a fellowship, which means that everybody involved in the organization is a member, is somebody that's suffering with it themselves and in recovery from it themselves. And it's I just want to throw that in there really because it's a lifesaver. If you've got issues with weight, compulsive eating, check out Overeaters Anonymous. Check out my video on it first, because it's good to know a little bit about it before you engage with them. So you've got the two extremes, okay? You've got the overeater, that's an eating disorder, and you've got the undereater, which is the anorexia. And then you've got bulimia. And bulimia is, in a way, it's like a swinging from one to the other. So somebody with bulimia will binge, they'll overeat, they'll feel really bad about that, and then they will make themselves sick, or they'll use laxatives or various other means of purging, binge and purge cycle. So that's kind of what's going on there. Okay, so there is such a thing as sex addiction. That's one of the things I specialize in. It's a complex thing, and I've done some videos that touch on it. So sex addiction, somebody's sexual appetite is very strong. Usually sex addiction involves, people say silly things about sex addiction. They say, oh, chance to be a fine thing, I'd like to have that. No, you wouldn't. Sex addiction isn't just somebody that has sex a lot. Sex addiction is, often involves pornography, and often involves using sex workers, and often in ways that leave the addict very degraded. It degrades their own morality. It kind of ruins their lives. All addictions ruin lives. There's no such thing as a good addiction. So so that's sex addiction. And then the opposite extreme is sexual anorexia, which is an aversion to sex, a discomfort with anything sexual. Okay, so we would probably describe that, if somebody's got that, we would probably describe them as being prudish. That's the kind of word that we use, which is a little bit, pejorative and judgmental when we're actually talking about a condition. Now, there might be various reasons why somebody's developed this sexual anorexia, this great discomfort with sex, and I'm not going to get into that in this video. And then there is something in the middle which is akin to bulimia, which is where people, you could call it sexual bulimia, where people swing from being a sexual addict to being sexually anorexic. And often the most the best example of this often is people that become priests or ministers. Now, the Catholic Church tracks I think people with these conditions because of its insistence on the sexual abstinence, celibacy of priests. So people who are sexually anorexic or sexually bulimic will take solace in the church, because it's a way of protecting themselves from their issues around their sexuality. But it doesn't work in a lot of cases, as we know through a lot of the child abuse cases that are really, really awful. So this film, the central plot, which unravels gradually. I love the way, I think it's done beautifully actually, how the story's told, and you only find out things at the end, is this murderous priest who is so basically somebody, this woman here that you can see on the screen now, this character, she comes into contact with this priest. She's doing it now. She's just going into the confessional. She's not a practicing Catholic. There's various reasons why she's friends with another priest and she wants to find him, so that's why she goes into the church. But she's feeling bad about some issues that are going on for her, so she pops into the confessional, and this is the villain here you can see through the screen. And she starts to talk to him, but kind of feels uncomfortable with him because he's creepy as hell, and flees the confessional. But he gets the hots for her, and he gets the hots for her because she reminds him of a former love that he could not get over, and his mother encouraged him to join the priesthood and repress his sexuality. This is 30 years ago in his youth. So therefore he's become, from being sexually addictive, he's become sexually anorexic. He's joined the church in order to maintain that sexual anorexia, and he is super harsh with anyone in his parish or comes into his sphere who is having so much as a sexual relationship. He's super harsh, and he's onto them. He's onto them like a ton of bricks. But she starts to disclose some issues around her love life, and that piques his interest. And she also looks like this woman from earlier on in his life, and he starts to swing from the sexual anorexia to the sexual addiction. And he goes after her in a very predatory fashion. And then he has a crisis of conscience. He's split down the middle, so that takes him to, his mental health goes completely to pot, and he starts to do some really terrible things. Okay, and I think this is very accurate. I'm not usually to this degree. I don't know whether there are any kind of murderous priests. There probably have been. Makes me think a little bit of Harold Shipman, the GP that killed hundreds of his patients, because apparently he was the perfect GP. He was charming and super kind and super attentive to his patients, but then would kill them. But that's a different thing. There's an overlap. So when you next hear a headline, usually it's in America. Sorry, American people, but this is where you hear about it. Usually in America, you hear that some pastor, not pasta as in the Italian food, some pastor has who preaches against pornography, preaches against sexual liberalism, sex before marriage, all that kind of things, is caught in a hotel room with 16 sex workers and whatever the scenario is. People say, oh, what a hypocrite, they're not really hypocrites. Well, some of them are. I mean, you can't judge really unless you dig deeply into it. But what I'm saying is that potentially that situation isn't anything to do with hypocrisy. It's about this struggle between the two different extremes that that person is swinging between. One is the sexual addiction, and then when that's indulged, or when that comes out of the bag, there's a huge sense of guilt and shame and disgust. So then the person swings back into the sexually anorexic mode, and then the frustration builds up, or they get triggered, like this guy here, brilliant actor. He gets triggered by her, and then it all comes back out of the bag again. So he starts to indulge his sexuality, and then he feels really bad about indulging his sexuality, or even the idea, or even the fear that it's going to come out of the bag, and then that makes his sexual anorexia worse. So it's it's the bulimia, it's the swinging from one thing to another. So now I think the film is reasonably deep. It's not a superficial film, but it's not massively deep, but it's reasonably deep. So there'll be other factors going on in this process, and it might not be that he's not perhaps he wasn't even sexually addictive. Perhaps he would just had this very controlling and repressive mother, and mother issues. That's certainly hinted at in the film. So I'm not saying that this film is definitely about sex addiction, that it's definitely about sexual anorexia and sexual bulimia, but it does illustrate it beautifully. And great film. So the actor, there's a kind of like a good priest in this, that works under the bad priest, if you like, just to keep things simple. And he's played by the guy that played the neighbour in a sitcom called George and Mildred, which I don't know if anyone... This is a tangent, by the way. Completely going off on a tangent, but that's what we do on this channel. It's a nice tangent. So there's a sitcom which was also had an interesting take on sexuality, George and Mildred. So if anyone remembers this is another 70s thing. So Mildred was this very sensual, voluptuous wife, and it's interesting because the actor that played her, she had very fulsome lips, and she was always kind of wanting sex with her husband, and he was this very uncomfortable, probably sexually anorexic guy, quite a small guy, and whenever she kind of came on to him, he would be absolutely terrified. And the guy that plays the good priest in this movie plays the snobby next door neighbour in George and Mildred. So yeah, I just thought I'd mention that for people that are of the same generation as me, a little bit of nostalgia around George and Mildred, which kind of deals with different polarities of sexuality in a different way and in a different context. So I think all the criticism this film had, I think this is far better plot, far better characters, far better psychology than a lot of the films of its ilk, and I just really definitely worth a watch if I haven't spoiled it for you completely. So check out my other videos on this. So just to give credit where credit is due, the concept of sexual anorexia doesn't come from me. It comes from Dr. Patrick Carnes, who's written some brilliant stuff about sex addiction. He's written some brilliant stuff for sex addicts. And if you recognize yourself as a sex addict, give me an email. Contact me via our website, which is retract.com. See if I can help, because I do online work and I can help you with that. And there are other resources to help with sex addiction, which I can point you in the direction of. The same goes for porn addiction and sex addiction. They're two distinct things, and there's an overlap, so you can have one or the other, and you can have both. And I've done some videos on that as well. So no need to kind of let shame or guilt get in the way of getting help. Is a very common thing, more common than people think, and you can get help for it and get well. So thank you for listening. Please subscribe, listen out for new content. I've done lots of stuff on the old have a look at the old content. I've done lots of stuff on different aspects of psychology, different conditions, stuff around sexuality, sex addiction, the whole schmozzle. And hopefully we'll catch you in the next one. Rangimarie.